Over the last year, I've edited 30 novels and submission packages. Throughout my career, that number is many hundreds more. Nonfiction how-to books, to science fiction and epic fantasy, and even romance novels. But here's the thing. No matter the genre or the age group, almost every writer I've worked with has struggled with 3 common mistakes. And these aren't new or trending writing mistakes. They're universal. I've seen them consistently throughout the last 15 years in the publishing industry. We're going to deep dive into these 3 common mistakes and talk about what you can do to fix them. Do this and you'll see immediate improvement in your manuscripts. The kind of improvement that makes agents and editors take note. The first and most common mistake I see is what we call show, don't tell. This is the tendency to over-explain what's happening in the scene. And rather than let the reader create a mental image of what's going on, writers feel the need to make sure they get their point across and often write 3 times as many words as they need to, often without really showing the reader anything or using any emotion at all to describe the scene. An example of this would look like Lily watched as Eric heaved his suitcase out of the trunk. She couldn't believe her only child was all grown up and heading to college. She felt like crying. Actually, she was crying, but barely noticed it because she just couldn't stand the idea that she'd be going back to an empty house. There's a lot of telling in here with the description of what this character is seeing, what they're feeling and thinking, and these are things that we want to convey, but here's how I would fix this sentence to remove the parts that tell you what's happening and allow the scene to breathe. Lily let go one last embrace before Eric's first semester. She held back tears, more for his benefit than hers. "Bye, Mom," he said. "Goodbye, sweetie," she said, dreading the ghosts that now waited in her empty nest. This gets so much more at what the character is feeling without telling us anything, and it hints at something deeper behind the scenes that we haven't seen yet. See, show, don't tell doesn't mean to always show the reader mental images of actions that are happening on the page in every sentence. It means to use active language rather than passive language to let the reader bridge the gaps between what you're writing and what you're deliberately leaving off the page. When we don't give readers enough room to allow their imaginations to build on the scene that we're writing, we do them a disservice. Give your readers some credit because humans are really good at imagining things. So remember, showing is active language that evokes a mental image, and telling is passive language that tries to cram a mental image into a reader's mind. The next issue that I see writers often make is what I refer to as the dreaded wasings. This is the use of common filler words in your sentences to try to fill out what's happening in the scene. Unfortunately, filler words often cause the reader to stumble through the prose rather than letting it flow through their mind. Now, I call this the dreaded wasings because the most common filler word I see is the word was, and this is often followed by a verb such as was swimming or was running, which can simply be edited to the past tense form of that verb, such as swam or ran. Filler words take many shapes and sizes. There are dozens of them, including such words as had, just, very, that, basically, suddenly, thought, felt, saw, heard. There are many more of these filler words. Here's an example of using too many filler words in a sentence. Jane was running to the store. Earlier that week, she had been worried the store would run out of turkeys for Thanksgiving dinner before she could get there, but just never made the time to go. She couldn't handle the thought of her mother-in-law saying something stupid again, and suddenly felt like an idiot for waiting until the last minute. Now, there are a lot of words in here that aren't pulling their weight, and in fact are weighing the scene down. There's a lot of tension here, but we're not really getting to it because there are too many words in the way. So here's how I'd fix this to remove the filler words and make the scene more active. Jane ran to the store in an ADHD-induced panic, brought on by an abrupt memory of her mother-in-law. Not this year, not again. She would not listen to that woman complain about deli meat for Thanksgiving dinner. This fix shows us more about the scene, using language that evokes a mental image and family tension rather than telling you that you should be worried about the mother-in-law. Now, you also may have noticed the similarities between this and show don't tell, and that's because they often go hand in hand. Not all telling scenes use filler words, but almost every sentence with filler words is a passive telling sentence. The next mistake I see is writers starting their manuscript in the wrong place. There are a number of different ways writers make the opening scene mistake. Often, writers will use too much setup before getting into the heart of the story, and this means that the writer wants to make sure you understand everything about the world and the characters and the plot before actually taking you on the journey that the story promises. And that's often too slow to capture a reader's attention. Other times, writers use cliches, such as the character waking up from a dream, the character staring into a mirror, a big info dump about the world and setting, a funeral scene or a high-stakes chase. And finally, one of my personal pet peeves is the concept of in medias res and how writers often misunderstand it. In medias res is Latin for into the middle of the narrative, and the general advice is to start your story in medias res, in the middle of what's happening in your story. This is generally good advice. Too often, though, writers misunderstand this concept and think action scene rather than important narrative moment, and so they'll start the story with a sword fight or a parkour chase through a city or a heist without delivering any emotional stakes about the story or the characters. Now, you can start off with a sword fight or a heist or a chase if that works with your characters and the stakes of the story. This is harder to give you an example of since it would take too long to show the before and after of a whole scene. Let's give it a go with a single paragraph and see what we can do. Alfred woke up, heart racing. He'd had the most intense dream about a tentacled monster the size of a planet, speeding towards Earth like a comet, ready to devour the explosive aftermath of its collision. He felt somehow that it wasn't just a dream, but he knew that was stupid. For one, giant tentacled monsters didn't exist, and for another, he was an astrophysicist, and the only asteroid even close to colliding with Earth would be the flyby of Apophis in the year 2029. That used a lot of cliches, packed all into one small paragraph, but here's how we can change this in order to make it work without using so many cliches. Alfred knew an asteroid impact today was impossible, and yet, when he sat down at his desk with a steaming black coffee, he could hear them, the screams of a billion voices crying out in unison, snuffed out of existence. It was coming. See, what's important here is that we remember the reader has an amazing imagination. We can imagine him getting to work. We can imagine how many times he may have heard these screams, either in dreams or otherwise. We can imagine that these screams are from people dying in a planetary collision, and we get the sense that there is something supernatural at play since he's hearing this extremely foreboding thing. We do all of that setup without telling the reader too much, without using cliches, without using a throwaway action sequence. One thing I make sure to tell every writer I work with is this: figure out where your story starts. Figure out where the character is kicked into action. This is often called the inciting incident or the catalyst. Understand what happens in that moment and then either start right there or start just a beat before that moment to allow for a small amount of setup. Remember, every writer I've ever worked with has made one or all of these mistakes in their manuscripts. These are common mistakes. They're not new. And I promise that if you go back through your manuscript with these 3 mistakes in mind, as well as the fixes for them, you'll start to notice where your writing can improve. Fix these mistakes, and you'll see just how many more people want to read your work, because it's more than simply fixing a few words here and there throughout your manuscript. It's more than just wanting to be better. It's about taking deliberate steps to engage with your readers the way that they want to engage with your story. So, show, don't tell. Work on removing filler words and turn your passive sentences into active ones. Most of all, figure out where your story starts so that your first sentence, your first paragraph, your first page all pull the reader in and make them want to stay until the end. I hope this has helped you learn something new, and I hope you use these tips in your writing. If you do, I promise you will become a better craftsperson, a better storyteller, and a better writer. I'm Ben Grange, co-founder of 3030, a former literary agent and a book publishing professional of nearly 15 years. A reminder, the 3030 February challenge is live right now at 3030k.com. Start logging your progress and engage with the community as we all work towards the goal of writing 30,000 words in 30 days.